It's a headline that's become too regular in this country. Gunman and Marine slain, describe life as prison, days before rampage, a life of monotony, urge the study of the Quran as a path to add meaning. Young man again yesterday, this Mohammed Youssef Abdulaziz, apparently acted independently, they think, in 24-year-old kid. Acted independently in a spree of violence that ended with his death by police gunfire. He killed 4 Marines yesterday. 4 Marines left dead, a number of people left injured. We continue to hear this over and over and over again in our country. And lots of questions. How does society deal with these attacks anymore? How do we always say, well, how can we get out in front of this? How can we do something about it? Or can we deal with them at all? It doesn't really matter what we call them at this particular point. We seem to wrangle more over, was it a hate crime? Was it a lone wolf? Was it a terrorist act? Well, of course, it's a terrorist act in any community when someone goes off the hinges. I guess when you say it's a lone wolf, then it means, well, okay, there's nobody else around, at least for the moment. The guy that deals with this all the time is Kevin Mellott, and I go to him regularly. He's an international security expert, and he joins us this morning on the Gary Sutton Show. Hey, Kevin, how you doing?
I'm doing well.
Kevin, always good to have you on. Unfortunately, I usually have you on when some of these kind of things seem to happen, which is like every week anymore. You see it in the headlines. People ask all kinds of questions about this. How does society deal with this stuff? Or do you just say, hey, it's the way it's going to be in a visual society where everything is out there all the time, 24/7 in terms of information? What's going on here?
Well, I would suggest that society will deal with it atypically for America. In America, you can kill people on a regular basis, and no one gets too worried about it as long as it's not a relative or in their town. But as soon as you do something big, everybody freaks out. So, example being, Al-Qaeda was killing American servicemen worldwide for years before September 11th, 2001. They killed our guys on the east coast of Africa. They killed our guys in Saudi Arabia. They were killing Americans everywhere, but it wasn't in the U.S., and it wasn't a number high enough to scare everybody. But when they did the September 11th incident, it was a lot of people all at the same time in America, and that's what got the country's notice. Now, we're kind of an interesting country because we're really a conglomerate of 50 states and some territories, and people just kind of look at it like, I remember September 11th initially in Dallas, where we operate from. Like 3 days after September 11th, people were back out having happy hour going, well, I was really sad for New York. But then it started to mount up that, wow, they might do it in other cities, and then all of a sudden everybody got together. So psychologically, Gary, I think it's a question of each society, but in the States, people are pretty self-centric anymore, and they're really not thinking outside of their own family, own neighborhood, or themselves.
I wonder if, from the group standpoint, again, stay with society for a moment, if we start, because we're seeing this so regularly. I mean, we're seeing this kind of thing, and the MO seems to be pretty similar in a lot of these cases. But you see this, you say, okay, does society now deal with it in a little bit more of a focused fashion because they say it is the very randomness of this which is the scariest part of it?
Yeah, and I look at this from a practitioner. I'll go out and take care of the problem, depending what the orders are. But society has to get to a point where they want to do something. And there's some very interesting dichotomies that have been occurring lately in our society where we don't want to get involved overseas, but we want to get the overseas imports at the discount rate. We don't want our military all over the place, yet there's allies that have economies completely reliant on us protecting them. So, it's the old you want your cake and eat it too routine, and that's going to come to haunt us. We have Americans saying we don't want any terrorism, but we don't want our kids in the military. Okay, well, if no one signs up for the military, how do you suppose we're going to take care of these foreign adversaries? And it goes on and on. I mean, I was just amazed at the far left politically in our country on the day that the Supreme Court approved gay marriage.
Right.
ISIL was throwing gay individuals off a high-rise to their death only because they're gay. But the far left doesn't want to put ISIL out of business and engage in a fight. Yet they're killing gay people because they're gay. But, it's like, well, that's their country. Our country, we don't do that. Well, if you get that mentality, that only in our country are we going to be worried about what's going on, then you better lock the borders down and really get hardcore about who's allowed to travel here, because they're going to bring it here. It's already here, but they're going to bring it here more and more because we're such an open society.
I'm just wondering at what point in time today ISIL comes out and says, yeah, we were responsible for this kid. We haven't heard that yet, and maybe it will turn out that doesn't happen. But for ISIL, every time Americans are killed or something's disrupted, I would think that ISIL is going to run out there and try to claim credit for it. Your thoughts about that?
Well, first of all, the president calls these guys lone gunmen. They are not lone gunmen. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, he was a loner. He had his own plan. Nobody knew what he was doing. Nobody knew his motivation. Nobody knew where he was. That's a lone individual. These guys are remote agents. I'll guarantee you he's a remote agent for ISIL, okay? And let's be realistic. Even if he wasn't under direct command of ISIL, they've influenced them with all the crap they put out on the Internet,
right?
All the media covers what they do. It really, if he doesn't have a direct commander in ISIL, it still doesn't have any impact on whether he was influenced by them and encouraged by them. Because the simple media coverage and the simple Internet activity of the organization will motivate people to participate or to support the effort.
It's interesting, and you've got to, I don't know how you react, but you got to sit back sometimes and say, okay, we seem to, on our national level, on our federal level, be more interested in what we call this stuff than we do in solving it. I remember when we had the Fort Hood shootings, and the president called it workplace violence. And you, of course, then the people who were left behind don't get any benefits as a result of that. And so a lot of us sat back and said, are you kidding me? Workplace violence? I mean, you talk about, so anymore, I'm not sure, everything has a terrorism aspect. I'm not sure how we break all these things down into the politically correct. Is it terrorism or is it not terrorism?
Well, the basic guideline for terrorism, and this is pretty interesting because we have federal laws that identify what terrorism is, and the basic underlying thing about terrorism, it's a person who commits violent act or persons who commit violent acts against non-combatants. A non-combatant is somebody who's not in the military at war with somebody.
Right.
So when you start blowing up civilians or shooting police officers in a domestic setting, they are non-combatants. So that's the true definition of terrorism. But I hate to say it, but our current administration twists the definitions by the week, depending on what they want to say. When we had our ambassador in Libya was killed, they were trying to figure out if it's terrorism, right?
Yeah.
There's a federal law and a UN law that says if anybody kills an ambassador or a diplomatic officer, it's immediately classified as an act of terrorism. So the minute they killed Chris Stevens, it was terrorism. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And the reason is civilized countries cannot have ambassadors and diplomats and envoys without having that protection that there would be severe punishment to anybody that kills them. Otherwise, you'd never be able to have a peace deal when countries have conflict. So it was terrorism the minute they killed them, and yet our administration couldn't bring themselves to say it was terrorism, even though we knew it was. But even without knowing the intelligence behind the attack and what it was about, a civilian could say it is terrorism. It says so right here in the federal and UN statutes.
We look at the type of people that are doing this in the country. And last time you and I talked, Kevin, you said, don't kid yourself, there are girls doing this too. But the prominent group is boys, men, aged, let's say 18 to 25, somewhere in that area. Is there something we ought to be doing in this country to start to address these people? I'm looking here. This kid says no clear motive has been determined. Now, you suggested there probably is a clear motive and probably possible ties to ISIL or ISIS, which will come out. But just days before the attack, Abdul Aziz began a blog that included references to life as a prison of monotony and urged the study of the Quran as a path to add meaning. Now, we're going to have on a guy later on today who is the president of the group. His name's Mahir Osman, the president of the group Ahmadiyya, which is a Muslim youth association, which came out, which has tried to do something about this. What should we be doing about these people? Muslim or otherwise, but who seem to be predominantly in this age category. What's going on here?
Well, I'm not a psychologist,
right.
I'm not a sociologist, but I've dealt with these individuals face to face, and I've interrogated a lot of them. And I'll tell you what, when you raise a kid in the U.S. now, tell him that he's the most important thing in the world, that everything he does is wonderful, gives him a trophy when he fails at what he does in sports or schoolwork, and then you send him to college, he gets a degree, and then he gets out and finds out nobody in the world cares about what he thinks. Nobody in the world really worries about his happiness. Nobody in the world is going to babysit him like his parents did. They're lost. This is how a lot of these kids move back home. I mean, I can't, I was, at 18, I was out the door. I got all sorts of people that have kids living in their basements or in their houses that went to college, got good degrees, and don't have jobs, aren't employed, have no feeling of self-worth because mom and dad aren't babysitting them like they used to. It goes on and on. So our own social structure and the way the kids are being raised is creating a vacuum when they suddenly find out that everybody in the world really doesn't view them the way their mom and dad told them growing up. Okay? There are parents giving kids brand new cars when they're 16 that didn't earn them. And they think that's just a normal thing to do. If you give a kid all the stuff without ever earning it, then all of a sudden when they get out of college and they're 22 to 25, which I think is the critical age range, suddenly nobody's going to babysit them and give them whatever they want because they're who they are. They have to earn it, and they just don't get that. It's tough on them. I think we're doing a disservice to that generation.
It's funny. I've been coaching basketball. This is my 40th year of coaching basketball. So I had this basketball camp this week for these girls. I had girls basketball coach over at a local high school, and the kids were great all week long. But I have this one game I play, which is kind of like Simon Says, and I call it Sutton Says, and you have to listen and get it right. And I said, listen, if you could stay in this with me for 4 minutes, I'll have a pizza party for you at the end of the week. Nobody could stay in for 4 minutes. So last night we get to the end of the camp, and we're putting 5 in the middle. We're all putting our hands in to say goodbye. And one girl says, "Can't we have a party?" I said, "You didn't beat me. You didn't win." "Well, but can't we still anyway?" I said, "No, because you have to understand that when you win, you win." And through the week we were trying to teach them that there are consequences when you lose sometimes, and there are things that happen when you win, and there are good things and bad things. It seems to me that is missing from society. I think you've hit on a great point that if we're not teaching people that there are consequences and there are also rewards for what you do, I mean, you're right. You get out there, and we're seeing a lot of lost individuals out there. I'm thinking just Obamacare is a great example. We're keeping kids on their parents' policies till they're 26. You're out the door at 18. Most of us were out the door at 18, but that's not the case anymore, where we're trying to have people be dependent for a lot longer time, right?
Right, and here's what's important. The radical Islam recruiters fill the void. Not only do they fill the void, but they fill the void of what am I to do with a religious mission that God wants you to do. That's the approach. Now, we both know it's crazy and distorted, but they're hitting them with filling a vacuum, and they're explaining to them why the rest of society doesn't care about them, and how America is a selfish country. And by the way, if you invent the word selfie, you're in a selfish country, okay?
Yeah.
Like, nobody really cares to see your picture at the grocery store and what you bought. That's crazy stuff.
Yeah, I know.
But while we're doing that, it allows the extremists from a terrorist organization to appeal to these kids and say, well, you're lost. We have the path. It's a path God wants you to be on, and you're serving higher than yourself. Okay, it's almost, interestingly enough, when we recruit people to serve the government, whether it's the military and government service outside of the military, we try to tell people, you're going to serve the country. You're serving other people. This is a good thing for you to do. Well, the terrorists are doing the exact same thing. They just have a more constant and consistent message from 5 different vectors into the life of these people that are lost. And pretty soon it looks appealing, or at least it looks like something positive that they should be doing.
I want to come back and ask you more about that if we can. Does it provide structure where there was no structure before? Is it true that kids crave structure? That's a question we're going to ask of Kevin Mellott when we come back, an international security expert, when he rejoins us here on the Gary Sutton Show right after this on News Radio 910 WSBA. Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. Kevin Mellott is an international security expert. Kevin, you hit on a couple really great points this morning. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you, and again, regarding this shooter in Chattanooga, Tennessee yesterday, do kids and young adults, from your experience, again, not as a psychologist because you're not that or a psychiatrist or anything like that, as an educator over the years and as a coach, I see kids, they won't say it because it's not the right thing to say, but I think they crave structure and they crave rules. And I'm wondering right now if in an absence of it by normal society, if the rules they're getting are the perverted ones that you see with ISIL and some of these wild terrorist groups. What do you say to that?
Well, first of all, without structure, you can't measure achievement.
Thank you.
And without achievement, you can't get self-worth and self-esteem. So what ISIL provides is a very hardcore structure. They got to talk to them a certain time, certain day. They got to log in at a certain point, certain time. They have a certain mission window. In this case, Ramadan. And the attack on the Marines in Tennessee, very sad, but not unexpected. They said they were going to attack our military facilities in the month of Ramadan, which ends today, actually. Ramadan's up today. And after the 4th of July, because our 4th of July represents everything they hate about America. Free speech, free choice of religion, women's rights, all that comes from the 4th of July, and they hate that. So this is right in the target window. We put warnings out. We knew they were thinking about it. And we also knew they were looking at recruitment stations, because if you hit the recruiting stations and people are afraid to go join the military because they might get hurt at a recruitment station, you end up hurting the military, which is their overall goal. But the bottom line of the deal is they put them on structure, and the mission's this time frame, and this is what you got to do, and they encourage them, and they support them, and they train them, and they acknowledge them, and they recognize them for achievement, and then they send them out the door. Now, my personal opinion is I've worked with police, fire, EMS, and military, and all of the young people that come in get hardcore structure, hardcore training, and then suddenly realize I can achieve much greater than I ever thought. It lets them recognize all of their potential capabilities. So I think structure is an important part.
So when they do that, though, so then where is the safeguard that says, yeah, you can achieve all that, but you're achieving it in the wrong way? Where's the counterbalance to that? Is that where society's kind of gotten off track?
Well, my buddies and I joke that the underachievers got control of the curriculum plan. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
They just reduce it to lowest common denominator instead of saying, the top performers where we want to be. And now the government's reinforcing that. I'm watching an online news show the other day, and I'm interrupted by a commercial from a company giving away free government cell phones. It says if you're on welfare now or forever, you can have a free phone. Just call this number. The government pays. It's not free. You and I and your listeners are paying for it. But, we've encouraged everybody to be a non-achiever, non-performer. It's no surprise that we've got kids in this group. And then when they get lonely and get lost and they're on the net and they can access this stuff, it looks like a possible path to achievement, and away they go. Now, the big thing is, Gary, we got to look at this from a perspective of how are we going to solve this. Are we going to run around and wait for the next incident and figure out what to do now, or are we just going to go cut off the head of the snake? I'm telling you right now, I don't know what the investigation is going to show, and they certainly need to do it to be correct, but I'll bet you he's tied into ISIL or was motivated by ISIL, and we're not taking them out. I think last week before they said we did 29 bombing runs on a weekend. What, are they kidding me? We did 29 bombing runs a minute during the war.
Right.
Okay, so we know where they're headquartered. They're out of Raqqa. We need to go wipe them out. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Number two, we need to go after any of the countries that are buying oil from them, all the oil they stole when they invaded Iraq, and wipe them out. And I don't mean physically, I mean take them off the banking system, put sanctions on them. If you're buying stolen oil and funding a terrorist group, you're not our friend, and we're going to damage you with sanctions or whatever we can do diplomatically to get them to knock that off. And then the third point is the Internet. We have the ability to shut down portholes. I get a crack up every time we talk about this terrible situation happening in Libya, and they said, they were watching a video. If you go back and look, you'll see most of the countries in North Africa and the Middle East blocked that video from coming into their country. And people can block portholes, they can block videos, they can make it where you can't access things. Now, in the U.S., we're such an open society, we forever have said, no, we're not going to censor the Internet, and we're not going to block things. But you know what? We got to stop and look at this. Should we be blocking these messages? Should you be able to see a message from a terrorist group telling you how to kill Americans? I'm not the guy to make that decision, but we have the technology to shut stuff down, and we're not doing it.
And their greatest weapon, and I've heard many, many people say this and write about it, has been the Internet. That's their greatest weapon, the technology that you have to affect a lot of people out there. And it seems like, that we say, well, you got freedom of speech, you got all. Well, you do, but do you have freedom to allow people to inflict warfare on your country? And that's a big question.
Yeah, I go back on you have freedom of speech, but it's against the law to yell fire in a crowded theater when there's no fire.
Yeah.
Okay? You can't use freedom of speech to cause damage, destruction, and death. And these guys are doing that via terroristic messages. And we have enough evidence now to show people that were recruited and influenced and directed over the net. So at some point in time, the public has to say, do we constantly want to be on the defensive for the next attack, or do we want to shut these guys down? And it's doable, and a lot of it's not even military related. Like I said before, I say wipe out their supporters. I don't mean wipe them out, physically. I mean you take them out of service. You get rid of their financial structure. You do all sorts of stuff that would create a situation where they can't function. Well, and then you find out who's your real friend and who's not.
And what I hear you saying, and I think I'm right on this, is if you're going to tolerate them to some degree, then you better be ready to tolerate this to a degree on a regular basis, right?
That's correct. And, back to the recruiting stations. Recruiting stations have been blown up and shot up since the 60s. And the FALN terrorist group blew up stuff in the 70s. They put bombs at recruiting stations. If we go back 2009, Little Rock, Arkansas, a guy with the name Mohammed shot up the recruiting station and killed a young private, and wounded another one. And it was a recruitment station in Little Rock, Arkansas. Same thing, 24-year-old, too, by the way, same exact age. And then you look back at the Times Square bombing. They did a bomb at Times Square recruiting station in New York. This has happened over and over. So on one hand, a recruitment facility needs to be open to the public so they can come in and see what it's about. On the other hand, we can put in a lot of passive security systems, ballistic glass to protect everybody inside, alcoves that have two-door, you got to go through a door and turn left and go through another door, ways of slowing people down from getting in, etc. If you looked at the TV images of the recruitment station yesterday, you could see shell casings laying on the sidewalk in front of the windows with an ejection distance of that kind of weapon, with ejection shells coming out of anywhere from 6 to 10 feet. That means at the worst, the guy was 10 feet away from the window, and he could have been even closer.
Wow.
So we've got things we can do to protect the stations much better. But we're chasing our tail if we're not going to go after the head of the snake and cut it off.
I'll tell you what, Kevin, you always give me a lot to think about, man. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us this morning, and I look forward to talking to you sometime on a little happier moment. So hope you have a great weekend. Thanks again for being with us, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Kevin Mellott, international security expert. We're going to put him up on the website on Monday, by the way, at facebook.com/910WSBA. Here's a guy that's telling it like it is, from a guy who is in the business of security, international security, and saying, hey, if you're going to tolerate this all around the world, then you're going to tolerate it at home. Yeah. Interesting stuff.